Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today we're going on a journey back in time to explore the surprisingly ancient roots of democracy. When we think of democracy, we often picture modern countries with elections and parliaments. But the seeds of this system, the very idea of people having a say in how they're governed, sprout much, much earlier than you might imagine. Forget the image of powdered wigs in the French Revolution for a moment. We're going way back, before written history even. Before we get started on our historical exploration of democracy, I'd like to ask you to consider liking and subscribing. We love making content like this, and your support truly matters. Also, let me know in the comments, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of democracy? Our story begins in prehistory. Before we had cities or even large-scale agriculture, humans lived in small hunter-gatherer bands. These groups, while not democratic in the modern sense, often operated on principles of collective decision-making. The leaders were not kings or queens. They were usually the most skilled hunters, the wisest elders, or simply those who could articulate the needs of the group best. Decisions, like where to hunt or when to move camp, were frequently made through discussion and consensus. It wasn't perfect, of course, but it demonstrates a very early human tendency towards shared governance. As societies evolved from small bands to larger tribes and villages, the way decisions were made had to evolve too. We start to see the emergence of councils of elders or tribal assemblies. These groups, typically composed of respected individuals within the community, would meet to discuss and resolve disputes, establish customs, and organize defenses. While power wasn't equally distributed to everyone, women and younger men were often excluded. It represented a significant step away from pure individual leadership. These early councils were essentially proto-parliaments, laying the groundwork for more formal representative bodies. Moving forward in time, we arrive in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Ancient Mesopotamian city-states, like Uruk and Lagash, weren't democracies in the Athenian style, but they show interesting developments. Early kings often relied on assemblies of citizens for advice and, in some cases, even approval. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories in the world, describes a council of elders and warriors consulted by Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk. This suggests that even powerful rulers had to consider the opinions of their constituents. The concept of law itself plays a crucial role in the development of democracy. Hammurabi's Code, one of the earliest known legal codes, established a set of rules and punishments intended to ensure justice and order. While not democratic, the very act of codifying laws and making them public was a step towards limiting the arbitrary power of rulers. The idea that everyone, even the king, was subject to the law was a revolutionary concept. This is the seed of what would eventually become the rule of law, a cornerstone of democratic societies. Now, let's hop over to ancient Egypt. While pharaohs ruled as absolute monarchs, recent research suggests that even here there were elements that prefigured democratic ideals. In periods of political instability or crisis, the Egyptian people sometimes asserted their will. There are records of popular uprisings and protests against corrupt or incompetent rulers. While these weren't full-blown democratic revolutions, they show that even in a highly centralized society, the people had a voice, and they weren't afraid to use it. From Egypt, we traveled to the ancient Near East, to the world of the Hebrews. The Old Testament describes a system where elders and prophets played a key role in advising the king and interpreting God's law. The concept of a covenant, a binding agreement between God and the people, also implied a degree of mutual responsibility. This wasn't democracy in the strict sense, but it emphasized the importance of accountability and the idea that even rulers were subject to a higher authority. Now we arrive at what many consider the birthplace of democracy, ancient Greece, specifically Athens. In the 6th century BC, a series of reforms began to transform Athenian society. Figures like Solon and Cleisthenes introduced measures that weakened the power of the aristocracy and empowered ordinary citizens. Cleisthenes is often credited with establishing the demos, the people, as the foundation of political power. This was a radical shift. The Athenian democracy was direct democracy. This meant that citizens didn't elect representatives. They voted directly on laws and policies themselves. Every citizen had the right to attend the assembly, where they could speak, debate, and vote on important issues. It was a noisy, messy, and often chaotic process, but it was also incredibly empowering for those who participated. Imagine a town hall meeting where everyone gets a say on every single thing. Of course, Athenian democracy wasn't perfect. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded from citizenship and had no political rights. This was a significant limitation, and it reminds us that even the most celebrated examples of ancient democracy fell far short of modern ideals of equality and inclusion. It's important to remember the historical context and acknowledge these flaws. These flaws should inform how we approach democracy and governance today. Despite its limitations, Athenian democracy had a profound impact on the course of Western civilization. It fostered a culture of civic engagement, critical thinking, and public debate. Athenians believed that citizens had a duty to participate in public life and to contribute to the common good. This emphasis on civic virtue and active citizenship is a legacy that continues to inspire democratic movements today. It's a powerful idea that participating is a civic duty, not just a right. Beyond Athens, other Greek city-states experimented with different forms of governance. Some adopted oligarchies, where power was held by a small elite. Others embraced tyrannies, where a single ruler seized power through force. But the example of Athens, with its emphasis on citizen participation, served as a constant reminder of the possibility of a more democratic form of government. The different political experiments showcased the pros and cons of each. The Romans, who conquered much of the Greek world, initially established a republic. In the Roman Republic, power was divided between elected officials, the Senate, and the popular assemblies. Roman citizens had the right to vote and participate in public life, although the influence of the wealthy and powerful often outweighed that of ordinary citizens. This republic was a new take on old Greek ideals. The Roman Republic, however, eventually succumbed to internal strife and civil war. The rise of powerful generals like Julius Caesar led to the establishment of the Roman Empire, where power was concentrated in the hands of a single emperor. While the Senate continued to exist, it became largely a ceremonial body with little real power. The age of republics fell to the age of empires. Even under the Roman Empire, the idea of law remained important. Roman law, codified in the Justinian Code, influenced legal systems throughout Europe for centuries. The principles of natural law, the idea that there are universal moral principles that should guide human laws, were also developed by Roman thinkers. These concepts helped to lay the groundwork for the development of constitutionalism and the rule of law in later centuries. It would also lead to further limitations of power that were once seen as absolute. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe entered the Middle Ages. During this period, feudalism, a system of decentralized political and economic power, dominated the landscape. Kings and nobles ruled over their territories, and ordinary people had little say in how they were governed. But even in this hierarchical society, there were glimmers of democratic ideals. Towns and cities, which began to grow in the later Middle Ages, often developed their own forms of self-governance. Merchants and craftsmen formed guilds, which regulated trade and provided mutual support. These guilds often had elected leaders and assemblies that made decisions on behalf of their members. These guilds were small but powerful in the towns they controlled. In some parts of Europe, representative assemblies began to emerge. The English Parliament, for example, evolved from a council of advisors to the king into a legislative body with increasing power. While initially dominated by nobles and clergy, the parliament gradually began to include representatives from towns and cities. This was an important step towards more representative government. These assemblies would change the political landscape for years to come. The Magna Carta, signed in England in 1215, was another significant development. This document, forced upon King John by rebellious barons, limited the power of the monarchy and established certain rights for English nobles. While not a democratic document in the modern sense, it established the principle that even the king was subject to the law. This concept would shape the development of democracies to come. The Renaissance and the Reformation, two major intellectual and cultural movements in Europe, challenged traditional authorities and emphasized individual reason and conscience. The rediscovery of classical texts, including those of ancient Greek and Roman thinkers, led to a renewed interest in republicanism and civic virtue. These thoughts would bring on an age of revolution. The Reformation, with its emphasis on individual interpretation of the Bible, also contributed to the rise of individualism and the idea that people should have the right to make their own choices about their beliefs. This was a challenge to the authority of the Catholic Church and a step towards greater religious freedom. This led to revolutions and strife across Europe. The Enlightenment, an 18th-century intellectual movement, further developed these ideas. Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Montesquieu argued for natural rights, popular sovereignty, and the separation of powers. Their ideas had a profound impact on the American and French revolutions. These names are still spoken and known today for their contribution to democracy. The American Revolution fought against British rule, established a new nation founded on democratic principles. The Declaration of Independence proclaimed that all men are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights, including the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This sent a message that would ignite revolutions around the globe. The United States Constitution, adopted in 1787, established a system of representative democracy with a separation of powers between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. The Bill of Rights guaranteed fundamental rights and freedoms to all citizens. The world had never seen a constitution like this. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, sought to overthrow the absolute monarchy and establish a republic based on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. While the French Revolution was ultimately unsuccessful in establishing a stable democracy, it inspired democratic movements throughout Europe and the world. The reverberations of this are still felt today. In the 19th and 20th centuries, democracy spread throughout the world. Many European countries adopted parliamentary systems of government. Colonial empires gradually crumbled, and newly independent nations often embraced democratic ideals. This expansion of democracy was slow and hard-fought. The struggle for women's suffrage, the right to vote, was a major milestone in the development of democracy. After decades of activism, women finally won the right to vote in many countries in the early 20th century. This dramatically expanded the scope of democracy and made it truly more representative. The efforts of women during this period should be recognized and learned from today. The civil rights movement in the United States, which fought against racial segregation and discrimination, also played a crucial role in expanding democracy. The movement's successes led to the passage of laws that guaranteed equal rights for all Americans, regardless of race. This movement and its figures should be widely known for their contributions. Today, democracy faces many challenges, including rising economic inequality, political polarization, and the spread of misinformation. But the idea of democracy, the idea that people should have a say in how they are governed, remains a powerful force in the world. It is a force that continues to evolve and adapt to new challenges. What kind of democracy will we create in the future? So as we've seen, the origins of democracy are ancient and complex. They stretch back to prehistoric hunter-gatherer bands and early Mesopotamian city-states. They evolved in ancient Greece and Rome, survived through the Middle Ages, and were reborn in the Enlightenment and the American and French revolutions. The story of democracy is a story of continuous struggle and progress, a story that is still being written today. If you found this journey through history interesting, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the past. Also, I'd love to know what's one aspect of democracy that you think is most important in our world today.